And we are happy to know found your way again back here, that you were not too exhausted yesterday. My name is Lotta Hedström, and I am supposed to be the moderator today as well. And some of you were not here yesterday, so I will start briefly to mention some practicalities that are important to know. In case of emergency, you have escape doors in this room. That's good to know. Fire escape or whatever. The cloakrooms outside are unsupervised, so please don't leave any valuables there. Smoking is not allowed indoors, so you have to go out to the entrance if you need to smoke. And today as well, Jane, vegetarian lunch. Yes. But today's lunch will be quite long, 1.5 hours, due to two things. One, you need to talk to each other without being interrupted by someone chasing you in. And secondly, we have a group of rapporteurs that need to prepare to draw conclusions and to see what we actually have found out, because this is a working seminar. We're here not only for socializing, but to produce something, especially with back in our minds are the evaluation that the Swedish government wants to perform. And more of the practicalities, if you want to get up in the air, you have the credentials for internet on the board, if you need those. And important is that what is said here in this hall will be streamed. That means you can go into the Swedish Afghanistan Committee's webpage and see in real time what's said here. This, and due to that, we have a dual sound system. I have 2 microphones, and each and every one who need to say something in the plenary session will have double microphones, and they should be used. And also for the keynote speakers, there's a number of microphones due to this double sound system. But the main thing to do today will be the group sessions, and inside those groups, no microphones, no streaming, chat ham rules. You can be free to express whatever you like, whatever thought comes into your mind. It will not be recorded or documented. So that's part of the what we have meant to achieve during this conference, that people should really feel free to think aloud. So Chatham rules in the groups, but double streaming sound system when we are here together. I think that was that. We had some shifts in the program yesterday, so one of the keynote speakers today will be, instead of Manisa, we will today listen to, let me put it right now, or I say it later on when we start, because we also need to say a warm welcome to the ambassador of Afghanistan, Hamid Hami. He was not able to come yesterday, but please, where are you? Yes, feel welcome. Thank you so much for paying attention and come to our conference today. So, if there are no questions about practicalities, the introduction to the group roundtable discussions will be given later. I think we jump into the keynote speakers. So, let me heartily welcome. First out is Mr. Barnett Rubin. He's Associate Director from the Center of International Cooperation in New York University. And he's their Director of the Afghan-Pakistan Regional Program at that center. And in connection to the Bonn Agreement on Afghanistan, he acted Special Advisor to the UN Special Representative of the Secretary General of the United Nations. And during the period 2009 to 2013, he was Senior Advisor to the Special Representative for Afghanistan and Pakistan and the US Department of State. He advised the United Nations on drafting the constitution for Afghanistan, the Afghan Compact, and the Afghan National Development Strategy. Most knowledgeable person. His previous experience includes the work in the U.S. Council for Foreign Relations at Columbia and Yale Universities and research at USIP. He is currently chair of the Conflict and Prevention and Peace Forum in the U.S. Please, Mr. Barnett Rubin, the floor is yours.
Okay, well, thank you for that introduction. If I am not mistaken, I'm the only American here. And oh, okay, there, you're not Danish yet? No. Okay. Yeah, and there's no Latin Americans here to challenge me on the definition of American. Okay. So, in a way, I'm going to ruin the party by talking a little bit about what the actual goal of being in Afghanistan is and how that affects what you are trying to do. And I think what you will have to bear in mind in terms of structuring what you do, what you can do, okay, that the operation in Afghanistan is not a state building and development operation. State building and development became part of it, but only as they are supportive to the main mission. And the main mission is counterterrorism. If you wanted to do state building and development in Afghanistan, it would have been much easier and cheaper to do it way before 9/11. But it was not in any country's national interest to spend such resources. So the United States is not spending and wasting, tens, hundreds of billions of dollars in order to make Afghanistan into a well-structured, well-governed, prosperous state. The only reason it is interested in that is to prevent terrorists from attacking the United States. In the United States, during the presidential election, Afghanistan was not mentioned, and it was kind of subsumed under the general category of terrorism. And the question that the candidates were debating is, has this made us, the United States, safer? Okay. And when I say it's the main goal of the operation, here's what I mean. First of all, the U.S. is, of course, the largest donor, troop contributor. The U.S. originated this operation. The U.S. decided to bring the UN in under certain terms. I was part of that decision from both the U.S. and the UN sides at that time. And the U.S. is the greatest funder. So there's one point that determines the operation, and that is the vote in the United States Congress to appropriate the money. If the United States Congress does not appropriate money to pay for the U.S. military presence and the U.S. aid mission and the Afghan government and the Afghan National Army, then you won't be able to stay there. Okay, so that shapes what the priorities are and how the mission is structured. Now, it doesn't mean that the people, I'm not saying that all of you and my fellow countrymen who are working on the issues that we're talking about here and that concern us all are insincere. They are not. They're very concerned about it. But when it comes down to getting billions and billions and billions of dollars and sacrificing thousands of lives, which is, compared to what Afghanistan has sacrificed, it's very, the number of lives is very little. But for Americans, with respect to Afghanistan, it's significant. So that shapes the entire environment. Now, I'm supposed to talk about sustainability. Now, notice the question of sustainability does not come into this goal. Okay. In fact, let me just to make it concrete. Recently, a group of former officials, 5 former ambassadors to Afghanistan, 5 former military commanders in Afghanistan, 2 former special representatives for Afghanistan and Pakistan, and a number of other people who are described as scholars of Afghanistan, issued a statement about what they thought U.S. policy should be. And here is how they defined the primary objective of U.S. policy. Even today, Afghanistan is central to what has been called the war on terror or the war against Islamic extremism. Now, this is an important sentence. It provides a location and an ally for watching and, if necessary, attacking extremists across the region. Now, imagine you are an Iranian, Russian, Pakistani, or Chinese official reading this, that the purpose of the operation in Afghanistan is to provide a military base for Americans to attack others in the region. Okay. That is how they look at it, although it's not the only way they look at it. Now, sustainability. First, we have to be clear about what we mean by sustainability. Sustainability means the ability of the Afghan state to be the primary funder of its own activities. Okay. And particularly, most important, the security activities. By the way, if the Afghan state does not pay for its own army, it's quite a stretch to say that Afghanistan is a democracy, because it means that the elected representatives of the people have no jurisdiction over the security forces. Okay? They don't vote on the budget for the Afghan army. The United States Congress votes on the budget for the Afghan army and decides it on the basis of the interests of the United States. Okay? And the Afghans have no way to change that at this point. Now, to be sustainable, they would have to have an economy that enabled them to pay for that. And that is not a matter of reconstruction. The territory of today's Afghanistan, which was demarcated by the British and the Russians at the end of the 19th century, has never provided the resources necessary to sustain a state. When Afghanistan was a self-sustaining state, as during the Durrani Empire, it paid for the government by invading Punjab and Kashmir and parts of Iran, because those were areas from which it could extract enough taxes. When the British pushed them back, they either needed to get British aid to support the state, or they fell into civil wars of various types. Ultimately, it was stabilized by an agreement with Britain and Russia. And from the late 1890s until 1919, the Afghan state was sustained by subsidies from Britain under a treaty. Now, interestingly, these were sustainable long-term subsidies because they were part of a treaty, a bilateral agreement that wasn't vague like the U.S.-Afghanistan Strategic Partnership Agreement or the current security agreement. It gave figures of how much Britain was going to supply every year, so the Afghan state could plan. Then when Afghanistan became independent, they lost that. Then a few years, of course, the king was overthrown. He didn't have an army, and new dynasty came back, and the British once again began supporting it. Then after the independence of India, British were out of the region, the state had to find another source of funding for the army. And Daud Khan first went to the United States, but the U.S. was allied with Pakistan, so he went to the Soviet Union. And so basically the Soviet Union funded the army, and he balanced it with the United States for a while. That broke down. We all know what happened. Okay, so, and then after the Soviets disappeared, the Afghan state had no funding to speak of, and it collapsed. That was the Mujahideen period. Then Taliban tried to reconstruct it according to their model. So now the Afghan state, the politics of funding the Afghan state is fundamentally a partnership with the United States and the donors. And you are part of that partnership because you are there in order to help the United States, whether you think that way or not. That's why you're there, in order to help the United States in its project with Afghanistan. And that means, that shapes how things are done. Let me just give you an example. The question of the army. Okay, right now, the army is the biggest obstacle to sustainability. And by the way, it's still not big enough and effective enough, right? Because it is slowly losing territory. It has a very high number of casualties. But it is almost entirely, I say almost just in case someone will come up with some little figure, funded by the United States and perhaps a few others. Some others are contributing equipment, China, Russia, others are giving some equipment. But basically it's funded by the United States. The salaries are paid for by the United States. Now, when they started building the security forces in Afghanistan, that's why they had the framework of lead nations, because the United States was not interested in police, justice, counter-narcotics. It was interested in the army to help it in this fight against terrorism. But in the early years, sustainability was a kind of concern, and therefore they argued about, the U.S. didn't want to spend too much money. They were busy in Iraq and so on. So they kept the size of the army relatively small. Then, when the Taliban became much more of a threat, they decided they'll change the army and they'll make it as big as is needed, regardless of sustainability. And now, that is a huge problem, because one of the points that, for instance, General Kayani made in meetings which I participated in and others which were reported to me to the United States is that that large Afghan army is a huge danger for Pakistan, not because it can invade Pakistan and defeat the Pakistani army, no, not at all, but because at some point the U.S. will leave, they won't get paid, and then you will have hundreds of thousands of unpaid armed men who, just given the economics of it, will do what Ahmad Shah Durrani did, try to loot Punjab. So they're concerned that, with that. Now, how do you make Afghanistan sustainable? I mean, and what these people in the statement that I mentioned are recommending is a long-term commitment by the United States in order to create this military base for the United States. And what do they say about the neighbors? That being there will give us the means to change their behavior, change the behavior of the neighbors, including Pakistan. And they have quite a bit about that, about Pakistan. But change behavior means prevent them from pursuing their national interests. And it's not going to work. They're not going to stop pursuing their national interests. Pakistan might modify it, but it's not going to stop pursuing its national interests just because we put a little more pressure on it. However, sustainability requires very good relations, stable, good relations with the neighbors, because Afghanistan is landlocked. It does not have a sufficient internal market to build an economy based on internal demand. It has to rely on trade and connection to the rest of the world. And you know, in order for Afghanistan to be connected to the rest of the world, in order for the rest of the world to have access to Afghanistan, and that includes the United States or Sweden, there have to be good relations with Pakistan, Iran, or Russia, because there is no other way to get to Afghanistan. Okay, so that's just the reality of being a landlocked country. And if you want people to invest a lot of money in Afghanistan and in the region, they have to feel confidence that there will be good relations for a long time to come. Because these type of investments that they're thinking about are not investments that pay off very quickly. You know, like the Chinese copper mine, which is now stalled. And it would be, even under the best conditions, it would be 5 to 10 years before they started recovering anything from it. Now, just to say something positive, which I think it does provide something to work with, because of the tremendous growth of China and India, there are now economic forces in the region that actually want to invest in the infrastructure and other things that are would be the conditions for building an Afghan economy. That is why China has started the One Belt, One Road project, which includes the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which is tens of billions of dollars or more. It has started a new investment bank, the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, a new development bank. India, which is blocked from connecting to Central Asia and to Afghanistan by Pakistan's refusal to open the border, is partnering with Iran to build a route through the Iranian port of Chabahar up through to Afghanistan and to Central Asia, which will enable India to have direct access. Afghanistan has signed agreements and started a railroad with Turkmenistan so that it can have a route out of northwest Afghanistan through Turkmenistan, over the Caspian and into the Caucasus and Turkey, and thereby get to Europe. I had a bunch of people from a think tank in Shandong province of China in my office recently, and I said, what is your province doing for One Belt, One Road? and they said, "We're building a railroad to Amsterdam." Okay. So they're quite serious about these big projects. And Afghanistan is benefiting a little bit from some of them. It's signed protocols and it started receiving things from these trains and so on. But to make it effective will require a huge amount of investment. Now, these American leaders, who are the people most involved in Afghanistan and the U.S. government, did not even mention that. And I should add, of course, that we have a new president coming in, and we basically have no idea what he's going to do. He said that he will grudgingly keep the troops in Afghanistan, but he never said anything about making a long-term commitment. He doesn't like any of the countries in the region, except India. He said he liked, well, he didn't like Pakistan until Nawaz Sharif called him, and then he thought it was full of terrific, fantastic people. So we really don't know what he will do about Pakistan, but if he listens to the military guys with which he's surrounding himself, he won't think they're great, fantastic people for long. Then, of course, Iran, he says, as the U.S. government does, is the leading state supporter of terrorism, but he likes India. All right, so so what does he think about Chabahar? Is he in favor of it because of India and Afghanistan, or is he against it because of Iran? I don't know. And of course, he's very close to Vladimir Putin. And I imagine, that's why I'm going to Moscow tomorrow, by the way, and I imagine that he and Putin will discuss Afghanistan when they meet, which should be very soon after he is inaugurated. Now, what is Putin concerned about in Afghanistan? What is Russia concerned about? Right now, as far as I can see, Russia is concerned about two threats in Afghanistan: the United States and the Islamic State. And for Russia, and also for Iran, those are the same thing. Because they believe, as I'm sure many people in Afghanistan do, and as Donald Trump apparently does, because he said that President Obama and Secretary of State Clinton were the founders of the Islamic State, and when given a chance by a journalist to walk that back a little bit and say, didn't you just mean they created conditions for it? He said, no, they founded it. All right. And they see it as one of the tools of the U.S., Saudi, Qatari, maybe Turkish alliance to try to push Iran and Russia out of the Middle East and South Asia. It no doubt seems crazy to us, as did the idea that Saddam Hussein was allied with Al-Qaeda. Okay. Nonetheless, that argument was used to justify an invasion by the United States. Fake news wasn't born yesterday. And in fact, that is the reason that both Russia and Iran, one of the reasons, I should say, but because of those two common enemies, United States and Islamic State, and by the way, I think Russia and Iran both have very exaggerated perceptions of the threat posed by the Islamic State in Afghanistan. Although I might be wrong, they are trying to set off a sectarian war in Afghanistan, it looks like. And so far the Afghan people are not cooperating, which is to their credit. But I don't know how much longer that can go on, with all of these people being killed. So these two common enemies, Islamic State and the United States. And that, by the way, is why Mullah Mansour, the former leader of the Taliban, went to Iran. He went to Iran for consultations with Iranian officials and Russian officials, whom he also met, about the possibility of cooperation against these two enemies, the United States and the Islamic State. And if you take that into account, then the killing of Mansour by the United States takes on a different meaning. It's not just about the Taliban and Kabul and Pakistan. It's a signal to Russia and Iran as well. But it means that's very dangerous because we're getting another great game in Afghanistan. So if Trump, and here I'm very much unwillingly, uneasily going to say something potentially positive about Donald Trump. If he and Putin actually can build some confidence, Russia might not regard the U.S. presence in Afghanistan as so threatening. Okay. And if someone explains to Mr. Trump what's going on, that there's all this infrastructure being built, he might be interested in it because there could be deals. And building huge amounts of infrastructure with dubious loans that will never be paid back, that is precisely his business model. And there could be big contracts for American firms in this if the U.S. gets into the AIIB and so on. So, of course, at the same time, bear in mind, they have all these anti-Islamic rhetoric, and they will be doing, the anti-Muslim activities in the United States have accelerated, as have anti-immigrant, anti-black, anti-Hispanic, anti-Semitic. All these things are suddenly increasing. And we know what happened in Afghanistan when there were Quran burnings in the United States. Namely, there were huge demonstrations. And if things like that happen repeatedly, it will get harder and harder for there to be an American presence in Afghanistan. So that's something we have to bear in mind. The big threat to the American presence in Afghanistan may not be Trump's position on Afghanistan, but his domestic policies, which will make it unsustainable. But I think that the investment in this infrastructure is really, now that it is real and not just an idea, could be the basis for starting some kind of international cooperation, which is the only way that Afghanistan can ever have a sustainable state.
Thank you so much. So please stand. We want to even though many of us have been reading your books, I'm sure there will be lots of questions, especially if you say that Donald Trump might not be that bad after all.
I wasn't saying that.
Okay, so 10 minutes for questions. Please present yourself, even if you did it yesterday. Please do it today as well, and be short. Don't have a lecture. Please, Mr. Rutti. 2 microphones.
Yeah, thanks for plain text. Not that it was all unknown, but we try to forget that from time to time, that as Henry Kissinger, to quote him the second time, has said, the Americans don't need any allies. I'm just wondering whether European governments who are, if they would be able to get together a little bit, just should tell the Americans, okay, it's your business, you messed it up, so clean up the China shop, and we do something different. That probably would also be a policy option, but maybe a utopian one, because as we heard from the Norwegian report, they all wanted to be nice allies of the US, but maybe they rethink under Trump. My question is actually, we too have been, and some others here, I think, at the Bonn conference in 2001, so everything was window dressing, and I mean, we could have known in those days, because the US told the non-alliance, you can go into Kabul and make your own business, although it has been decided before, had been discussed before, to keep Kabul neutral, so that also some other people could take part in governing or running the new Afghan state. Thanks. More remark than a question.
Well, I'll just add a remark.
I think we have to repeat the question. It was not very clear to me, and it must come out clear in the screening.
Yes, the question is, so then the whole Bonn conference 2001 about rights issues, which we also discuss here, was all window dressing from the beginning. So why bother with it at all?
Okay.
Well, first I should mention that Thomas and I were both part of the UN delegation to the Bonn conference, and that he played a personal important role in preventing any at least explicit recognition of the power of the warlords in the Bonn Agreement. I don't know if you remember that. Yes. Okay. Okay. I don't think it was just window dressing. Look, it was actually quite a debate in the U.S. government whether to do that or not. I first got involved. I wasn't in the government, but they invited me to a meeting in the State Department, which was about, should we just overthrow the Taliban and destroy Al-Qaeda, bomb everything, and then let them figure out what to do afterwards, or something else? And I and many of the others who had been involved with Afghanistan for a long time argued that the United States had to do something else. But not doing anything to stabilize and reconstruct Afghanistan after 1989 had been a huge mistake. That's how we got where we are today, and we had to do something. And we started outlining what that might be. Now, this was in the State Department, headed by Colin Powell, who was not part of the strategic core of the Bush administration. But he eventually succeeded in persuading the president to allow that. But the way they did it was different from in Iraq. They said they put the UN in charge of it, which was not a sign of their great respect for international institutions. It was a sign that they didn't really think it was important. Okay. But they agreed they had to do something. And it was fine to do that. It created a good environment. There was an argument that it's important for counterterrorism because if there was a stable Afghan state, this was the main argument, then it could be a partner of the international community in controlling extremists. And in fact, that was in the Bonn Agreement because Jim Dobbins of the United States and Javad Zarif of Iran came up to me at breakfast one day and said, why isn't it in the agreement? And so, as well as elections, they insisted on elections, for different reasons, of course. And so it got in there. But when there's a contradiction between those two goals, then the goal of the strategic core is what prevails. Now, as for Europeans, well, you know better than I what is the state of the European Union and what is the political state of the countries that form the European Union. So I don't think that's very likely right now.
Okay, but all in all, the Bonn Agreement is still valid.
My subjective feeling, which is not objective, is because I, like Thomas, was directly involved in it. I still find it quite remarkable that we had that meeting, which was much more bizarre and weird meeting than people understand, in Bonn in November, December 2001. And then it actually led to this process which built a constitution. And now, lo and behold, there's a president, there's a parliament, there's an army, there are laws, of course, everything's corrupt, it doesn't work properly, and it's all being funded by the United States and other donors, right? And that's the main, but still, all these things didn't exist before. And people who, I came to Afghanistan under the so-called Mujahideen government, and I came to Afghanistan under the Taliban government. So I knew the Taliban government was better because you could actually go outside without being worried that someone would shoot you. But otherwise, everything was destroyed, et cetera. And the fact that you see all those things that, for most people, they just look like normal. They assume any country would have them. No, Afghanistan didn't have them. Okay. Now it has them. And they're not functioning too well, but they're functioning better. But the main problem is, I would say, that they're not sustainable.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Sarabi from the High Peace Council.
Good morning to everyone. First, small comments. During the Taliban, when you go out but you couldn't see any single woman on the street in the public. This is a pity that you are saying that during the Taliban it was better. But the question, it's just the question is for the relation. You mentioned that for sustainability, Afghanistan should make a good relation with the neighboring. The relation is something from both sides. So what's your advice for the government of Afghanistan? If the other side will be not happy to have a good relation, what can we do? What should we do for that? Thank you.
Clear question. What should be done?
No, it's quite possible that, well, first let me go back a little bit. Obviously, well, maybe it's not obvious. Afghans don't want to rely on their neighbors or be told that they have to rely on their neighbors because most Afghans feel that that's how they got in trouble in the first place. And they welcomed the international intervention led by the United States, not because they're pro-American or something, but because they thought that the United States and its allies would protect them from their neighbors. Okay. And that is what President Karzai was always complaining about, that the United States did not succeed in changing Pakistan's behavior, which, of course, many people believe the United States controls. As a former official of the U.S. government, I can say that is not true, but you don't have to believe me. But I was part of the effort to try. It's quite interesting. It means that you have to commit yourself to a process. It may mean that but that what you can do will depend on what resources you have. So as long as you have the degree of backing from the United States and others that you have today, then the president of Afghanistan can make speeches like the one that President Ghani made at Amritsar about Pakistan. Okay. It may be a good idea, it may be a bad idea, but he can make such speeches. Okay. And, because then you have something to negotiate with. If you lose that, or if you have less of that, then it'll be less possible. But it means if you don't manage to get good enough relations with your neighbors, it means that you will never be able to sustain your government because you won't be able to build an economy. Because there's no demand. Afghanistan would be rich. People say it's rich. It's not rich. It would be rich if there was a way of bringing all of its valuable products to markets. But it cannot do that unless it has good relations with its neighbors. Now, why do I say neighbors? It could conceivably do that with good relations with one neighbor. But the problem is, unfortunately, that if you have good relations only with one neighbor, then the other neighbors see that as a threat. And they have the capacity to do something about it. So, in a way, sometimes people just throw up their hands and say, this is an American expression, I hope you understand it, there are too many moving parts. And in particular, the United States would have to support that kind of cooperation. And I think here's what I would say is the way that the United States could most help Afghanistan do that is by engaging consistently with those other countries, including about its military presence, so that those other countries did not perceive a U.S. military presence and financial presence as a threat. Now, for instance, that has worked with China up till now, because China, several years ago, took the same position as Russia and Iran, that it was opposed to any NATO bases in Afghanistan. Now, it says we want stability, and they're actually in private meetings they say you should stay there and don't leave too quickly. They're a bit worried that we're leaving too quickly. And I'll just tell you one little story about that. When I was in the government, I was part of a delegation that was meeting with the Chinese Foreign Ministry. We had a very good discussion back and forth with our Chinese counterpart. And then toward the end of the discussion, and he never raised the issue of U.S. military troops or anything. And then at the end of it, he suddenly remembered something. He said, "Oh, I forgot to read my talking points." So he picked up a piece of paper, looked down at it, and then in a very wooden way, he read these talking points, which were China is opposed to permanent NATO military bases on the landmass of Asia, and so on. But that was the last time I heard that talking point. Okay. Now, it's still for Iran, it's very complicated in Iran. Iran believed it was a positive message when President Obama, in the course of planning the drawdown, removed all American forces from Herat and Shindand. That's not widely known that he did that, but he did, and that was communicated to the Iranians, and they took that as a positive measure. Still, naturally, they see it as a threat. Russia sees it as a threat, and because especially now that U.S.-Russian tensions are rising, and President Putin and many other people in Russia believe that the United States is trying to destabilize all of the former Soviet Union with its aim at Russia. They are very active with non-state actors inside Afghanistan again, and it will require quite an effort. That's why I say, bizarre as it is, in my view, if President Trump, I said it, is able to work with President Putin, it might help.
So all in all, all countries need to build good relations to every other country.
Well, good enough.
Yes.
Good enough.
We have time for one short more question, and I will urge the women in this hall to raise their voices as well. We have a clear male dominance in putting questions. So if there should be any intelligent question, short one, for a lady, I will give priority to that. please, come on. Your voice is needed. Else, it's your turn. They didn't take the chance. Please present yourself.
Thank you. I'm Robert Egnell, a professor at the Swedish Defence University. Thank you very much for your remarks. One thing really struck me as interesting, and that is the idea that whether we like it or not, we're all there as supporting actors in the American counter-terrorist campaign. Now, my first question then is, do you think that includes, these are both very short. Does this include the Afghan government? Second one, given this focus of the US government today, do you think it is a benign actor that supports peace and stability in the region and Afghanistan, or do you think that it is a spoiler that the rest of the world should work around or against?
Yeah. Does it include the Afghan government? Yes. Absolutely. And they don't try to deny it. Okay, second, is the United States a benign actor or a spoiler? Look, it's like asking, is the United States good or bad? And the answer is no. No state or anything can be just classified as doing one thing or doing another. But is the main interest of the United States in the region peace and security and stability? No, it is not. In fact, there is no country for whom peace, stability, and security is the main goal in the region. Unfortunately, there is no Afghan politician for whom peace, security, and stability is the primary goal. Maybe there's some, maybe Governor Sarabi. But on the whole, they would feel threatened by peace, security, and stability if they didn't have power. So that's the sad reality of politics, where insecurity and mistrust is the normal condition.
Okay, that was the last word so far. Thank you so much, Mr. Rubin. And let me now introduce our next keynote speakers. Please, Ms. Humira Saqib. Take your seat behind all those microphones. Mrs. Saqib, she's the director of the Afghan Women News Agency. And she's also the chairperson of the Afghan Civil Society Organizations Network for Peace. And thirdly, you are also the board member of the Afghan Women Coordination Umbrella, which consists of 40 various women organizations. Please,
Thank you.
the floor is yours.
Thank you. In the name of Allah, Dear Excellency, guests, and SCA colleagues, good morning. Dear SCA colleagues, thank you for your efforts to put together this conference right after the Brussels conference, where discussion took place on very high and political level. But here yesterday and today, I'm sure, we will discuss more practical level issue with regards to Afghanistan development and transition from donor-driven economy to self-reliant one. Since I'm a journalist and I run a women's news agency, so I would like to start with media. In Afghanistan, we have had a very great progresses in establishment of freedom of expression and private sector media outlets, around 50 TV channels and more than 120 radio channels and more than 1,000 printed media and more than 5,000 website outlets are established all over Afghanistan. You can imagine how many journalists are trained to fulfill those outlets' needs. We have had progresses in free media, but as well biased media. Warlords have also used this opportunity to carry media outlets and continue broadcasting their issues. But safety of the journalists have been an issue. Male and female journalists have been killed. Media outlets received threats because of the news of issue they broadcast. Gender equality in the journalism and media has been an issue because women do not make a good percentage of the media in Afghanistan. So women's issues are not reflected very well. A great attention should be paid to media activists, security, and women's participation in media. Both technical and financial supports are required to improve and increase on this. We need to support media to fulfill the responsibility of creating mentalities that are supportive for peace building, stability, and economic development. Government has also started violating the freedom of expression in the last few years. So we have a law approved last year on right to information. So there is a need, strong, and the implementation of the right to information law. I think here I can also talk about elimination of violence against women law, EWAL. EWAL law that civil society and media played a good role to create awareness about EWAL law after it was approved by the president in 2009. But when it was sent to the parliament in 2013, and now that is still under debate. We need international community to provide political support so does not lose its value as an extensional law and its criminal sections. And punishments should not be incorporated in the criminal code. Now we will move to the capacity building and sustainability of the technical assistant. We have had a huge technical assistant and capacity building support from the international community in the sectors for which we are thankful, but today, still there are areas that we cannot fulfill our needs. And it shows that transfer of the knowledge has not taken place. So we would like to recommend that more attention is given to transfer of knowledge and skills to Afghans, and as well as to move from basic level to more advanced level of programming, budgeting, policy making, managing projects, and implementing projects, NGOs working with government. Now let's go to the economic transition. We are a consumer country for Pakistan and Iran and China's product mainly. Our industries will not be allowed to be established unless the international community intervene and ensure that Afghanistan can have independence of establishing a sustainable and self-reliant economy that produce jobs for Afghans. Our recommendation here is for the international community to put money with our government and private sector through public-private partnership and establish factories in order to produce for internal consumption and create jobs. One of the solutions to the neighboring issue can be working and using the regional capacities. We need to see what are the technical expertise available in the countries in Central and South Asia, and use those expertise for Afghanistan's development work. This is not only cost-effective, but also helpful to establish a friendly relationship with them and Afghanistan. In the last 15 years, many institutions and organizations have been established with the support of the international community, and that has become a trend and continuous process. After 15 years, each international community, without looking at the existing system and institution, thinks of new units in the ministries and start giving financial support to establish something new. We think the process should be stopped because by now we have enough institutions in the government and in the civil society frame to help implement development projects. Last but not at least, transparency and accountability should be mutual. As international organizations require the Afghan government and NGOs to be accountable and transparent, we should like them to as well transparently report on their expenditures on the development and military aid for Afghanistan. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And the floor is open for questions. And now we also want male men question, though you spoke in the perspective of women issues. Not totally, but mainly. Please go ahead. How can we enhance public-private partnership for the benefit of every part of development, I guess? Don't feel shy. We need your input. Surely there's something we want to...
Everything is very clear.
Everything was perfectly clear. Well, Börje, please introduce yourself.
Börje Almqvist. I worked for the SCA in Afghanistan, both with under the present government and during the Taliban's. And something I've seen with the new era is the Chinese products taking over and pushing out local production in Afghanistan in various fields. So how can you sort of re-establish domestic, and not only re-establish, but to develop domestic production for home consumption, that you don't buy Chinese shoes, you buy Afghan shoes, for example? How can you fulfill this dream of mine?
You get the question?
Okay. I think we should realize economic system in the government. We should think about what is the policy, economic policy in our government. We need that close some of the doors for some issues coming in Afghanistan. Maybe Manager John can be clear talking about that, because she works in the economic issue. If you want, Manager John can help you.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
Since you are also very engaged in the media sector, how has the open up of the media in Afghanistan, has it enhanced the possibilities for women in other areas as well? Can you give us just a glimpse of how the broadened space or scope of media has affected women?
Yeah. Unfortunately, can I continue? Or?
Yeah, please. They are communicating with me only.
Okay.
You answer my question.
Okay. Unfortunately, in Afghanistan, we live in traditional society. So media sector is run by man, and 900% by man. And when they're talking about women, only show the violence women. It's not true, because we need talk about another issue about women, for example, like academic issue about women, and some positive issue, and how we can improve the rights in our society. But men, obliges me, Afghan men. Yep.
No, most of us don't know what's said.
Someone can translate for her, because she's speaking very well Farsi. So it's a pity if we cannot.
I think I suggest that someone can translate for her, because she is
Maybe
speaking.
you help us out?
Maybe I can do it, because okay, manager can do it, because she is speaking very well Farsi, and she is very progress on Farsi in literature, but unfortunately doesn't speak enough. But of course.
So did she got the question about Chinese items?
Yeah, she got that, but she referred that to me, so I will respond.
Okay,
Because
so you respond to that
economic
one.
section is-
But yeah, now you will get another additional answer. Please,
Yes.
Manisa.
So on that, I think also this is what she wanted to say, that our government should have a very clear policy, and it should be done through a very proper process, which it cannot be done, from on a short-term basis, but on a long-term basis, looking at what products can be produced within Afghanistan, and how we can create barriers to those products that we can domestically produce for domestic consumption. So they cannot be imported from outside in order to support the domestic industries. And then the second thing that...
And is that policy at place, or does it has to be prepared?
Unfortunately not. Still, our government's policy on supporting domestic industries is not very clear.
Not yet clear.
Not yet very clear, no. Only after this unity government, President Ghani is very much into economic development, and he tries to put together economic policies and economic development strategies. So we hope that becomes very clear, that how they want to support the domestic industries. But one thing that they have done recently is the procedure for PPPs, as she clearly gave us a recommendation. Public-private partnerships. So recently we had a big public-private partnership project signed between our government and Al Qusay company, and they're about to establish several plants in Afghanistan, and one they have done already for beverages, which has created several hundred jobs. And so several other plants are on the way to be established, and several hundred other jobs are to be created, and domestic production and domestic consumption.
So that's a good strategy for the future, public-private partnership.
Public-private partnership, yes. So those are the two stuff.
And regarding my question about media.
So she needs to answer that in Dari, and then I'll translate.
Yes.
بخاطر از اینکه جامعه یک جامعه سنتی است و بخوای نخوایی که اون چیزی رو که من به عنوان یک زن میتونم ببینم از دیدگاه خودم ایده کل دنیا است، مردها نمیتونن اون رو ببینن یا برشون خیلی مهم نیست. و چطور میتونیم که بالا ببریم حضور زنها را؟ یکی که بتونیم اسپیس ایجاد بکنیم، فرصت‌های خاصی را برای خانم‌ها ایجاد بکنیم برای بلند بردن نالج. مثلا ما در کنفرانس بن وقتی که سال 2011 رفتیم، دمی پشت امی کامرای تلویزیونایی که از افغانستان آمده بودن یک دونه خانم نبود، و همچنین در کنفرانس‌های بین‌المللی دیگه‌ای که و اینی اسپیس هم ما باید ایجاد بکنیم تا دخترها و خانم‌ها که در چی میدیا کار میکنن اینا بتونن امو نالج تخصصی میدیا را داشته باشن. یک دو
Let her have a chance to catch up.
Okay, so it's everywhere that women have a different perspective towards women than what men's perspective is, and same as in Afghanistan. So if you want to increase women's participation in media, was that your question? Then we need to provide opportunities and a space for women, first of all, to build their capacity, their technical capacity, and second of all, to provide them the space to.
It's not yet there. The space is not yet there.
There are some examples that she gave, for example, not only inside Afghanistan but also outside Afghanistan. She gave the example that in all the international conferences on Afghanistan, outside Afghanistan, she has seen that all the time male journalists were sent out to report on the events, and just like you know the participants of the conferences were men. Similarly, the journalists were also men to broadcast on those stuff on Afghanistan.
و بحشت نکته است که چون در بخش ژورنالیسم اینا پرسان کردن فرصت‌های علمی و آکادمی برای خانم‌هاست. مثلا ما در کل افغانستان که چی است تحقیقی که صورت گرفته از طریق دفتر نه، ما فقط 1% زنای مستقل را داریم که در بخش خبرنگاری کار میکنن. این یعنی چی؟ اسپیس تعلیمی هم برای خانم‌ها باید زیاد شه. یک بس دیگه ای که اگر ما بتونیم ما میدیایی را تقویت کنیم که توسط خود خانم‌ها ایران میشه، این خیلی فرق داره با میدیایی که توسط مردها به پیش برده میشه.
Okay, so academic capacity of women also needs to be built in journalism. All the scholarships and educational opportunities were given on other sectors, but not much on media and journalism for women.
Okay.
So that needs to be increased so we could have more Afghan women trained academically in journalism.
Still a lot to do.
Yes, because she mentioned that there's only 1% of among women who are women who are in media in Afghanistan. Only 1% of them are academically trained. Yes.
Okay.
بس دیگه شما بگین که رنجا کمک شده نهادهای رسانه‌ای که خودشان توسط زنان ران میشه.
Yeah, and there are a few number of media outlets and media print outlets and radio and TV channels run by women. Those need to be supported financially and technically by the international community, so they are strengthened and their activities are become more visible.
So the road is open and we only have to start walking it.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Tashakur, thank you so much, Humira.
Thank you.
And please feel free to open up for more questions in the groups that you will attend. And from her, I think we can bring with us the need of cooperation between public, private sector. And from Mr. Rubin, we bring with us the need for international cooperation and good relations. And from yesterday, I was thinking when I came here this morning, what was the golden eggs from yesterday? For me, it was what you said, Manisa, work with the Afghans, not for the Afghans. And what Nicole said, do the right thing. Isn't that a brilliant thing to say? And also what was said in the beginning, if you don't know where you're going, the road can take you anywhere. So now it's time for you to go into the group discussions in your round tables, and you're already seated in them. If you want to change group for some reason, why should you? Then you have to attend to Lena. Where is Lena? She's in the corner. But please don't do that, because even if you feel that you have nothing to share, of course you have something to receive, and fresh eyes on a subject can be as valuable as the expert, isn't it? So please remain in your groups. That's the best.